So, there are. This is Bugley again. So, this is a follow up or a sequel to All Flags Are False. Okay, which shows why political flags, like for nation states, are symbolic, not actual, or well, actually, symbolic and representational, and therefore part of the imaginal, even when they're phenomenological. Okay, so the actual phenomenology of the flag is that it's made from fabric and a hard stick. Okay, you blend it in the ground, right? So, the flag exists dependent. The stick is therefore real. Okay, no. If you look at the other videos, you'll come to a comprehension why in philosophy the word real does not have the same meaning as exist, and does not have the same meaning as phenomenology. Okay, so phenomena, real and exist, are not the same thing. And a flag is an imaginal construct, okay, made from the phenomenology, in that case, of the material. Okay, so the actual symbolism of the flag and the egregor of nation state that it refers to is imaginary. Okay, what's phenomenological is the stick and the fabric. Okay, in a similar way that we'll do this again so you understand again. This cigarette packet, okay, is made from cardboard with a bit of with tinfoil in it. Okay, the phenomenology is cardboard and plastic. There's a plastic sheath on it with a bit of tinfoil in it. That's the phenomena, as well as the ink. That's phenomena. The symbolic is the language. Okay, that's the imaginal. Now, why is it imaginal? Because minds which are educated in language and literacy are taught to associate those shapes with sounds. So, reading or literacy is a type of associated memory, type of association, or associated pairs of imaginal ideas. The imaginal idea is that shape refers to that sound, which refers to that meaning. So you've got 3 steps there. The shape has become associated with a sound, which has become associated with something that may or may not be experienced phenomenologically, like the word male there. Okay, in literacy of English, that says M-A-L-E. Okay, sound M, sound A, sound L, sound E is associated with those 4 shapes in English literacy. Okay, that does not mean that is a true phenomena for that sound. Listen to the sound M. Does the sound M really look like that letter, that symbol on that piece of cardboard there? M. Why has it been shaped like that in symbolism? A. Does it really look like that? Does the sound really look like that? L. Does it really look like that? Does the sound really look like that? E. Does it really look like that? Does it really look like that? Does the sound really look like that? No, it does not. Okay? Here's something you can learn from dyslexic people. Okay? First of all, Canute's not dyslexic, by the way, as in fugly. Okay? Canute's Fugly's off YouTube nickname. Okay? So, Fugly talking to you right now, okay, is the name of the YouTube channel. It's the idea, okay? Right? Okay, you see that there? There is no reason to believe, first of all, in dyslexic studies, they know that they don't actually necessarily read letters backwards or, out of order. There is, however, a difference going on with their capacity to learn literacy, and and there is a difference with how they hear words as well in relation to pitches. Okay, so dyslexia means that that person doesn't necessarily have this idea that when you say M, it looks like that, or A, it looks like that, or L looks like that, or E, it looks like that. The sound image pairing might not be the same. They're having trouble reading that. Okay? And without being rude, are they telling the truth? Is dyslexia a means by which, sometimes, not all the time, the dyslexic person can show you that the associative pair that you've been taught between the sound and the image of the word is not a real association, that it is in fact dishonest? Here's another reason why we can ask that question. Translation or back translation between different languages. So, can a Polish speaking person, or someone who spoke Polish as their first language, and then German as their second language, and English as their first language, or any other group of non-English speaking languages, the point being is that each language is different from the other, both in the sound version and in the written version, and subsequently, when one language is translated or back translated from the other, that person has to go through additional steps to be able to process that information to derive the meaning out of it. So the meaning comes later. Finding the meaning, finding the purpose of the word, finding the intention of the word, finding what it's actually referring to, comes later. Okay? Because the symbolism has to be parsed. P-A-R-S-E-D, which is an English word that refers to decoding. Okay? So, okay, this word, okay, this in Polish is called papierosy. Papierosy specifically refers to cigarette papers. Now, papierosy sounds very similar to English. Perhaps at some point in history, Polish people purchased a product that had originated with English-speaking people who called them papers, and the Germans called them papieros, please. Papieros is how you say it in German. Polish is papierosy. Okay, papers. Okay. Okay. Refers to this being made from the pulp of wood. So a tree, if you speak English, you know what the word tree means. Gets chopped down and turned into pulp until it makes that shape. Okay? And they call it papers. Okay? No? Doesn't originate with English speakers at all, does it? What? What's the original word that refers to? Papyrus. Okay? That's Egyptian. This is an anglicization, in other words, the English version, of an ancient Egyptian word called papyrus. Okay? Because they are one of the groups that invented the art form of taking a tree and smashing up its wood, turning it into pulp, and making it a substance that you could use ink on to put symbols on to represent sounds. Now, the symbols that the ancient Egyptians used to represent sound were called hieroglyphs. So they used drawings, pictures of animals or something like that to represent sounds. This style of alphabet, it's not like that. It's more abstract. It's several stages away. At some point in history, this letter here, and this is true of English as it is of other languages. It's true of the Latin scripts, as it is of the cuneiform scripts and the hieroglyphic ones. At some point in the past, the sound or M was associated with a common phenomenological object. It was a sound that was used to describe a single object that was phenomenological. In other words, it physically existed. Or subject, maybe. And it got, because the sound that referred to that particular object or subject, in other words, something that was phenomenological, something that physically existed, was common, okay, the sound became used in other words. And so to represent the word or the sound required a symbol that was visually represented, something that phenomenologically existed, so that the people learning literacy could go, oh yeah, we know what that is, that looks like that. So in hieroglyphs or pictography, they go, oh yeah, we know what an ibis is. We know what an ibis is. Oh yeah, we know what a snake is. Yeah, okay. And it started off like that. And over the course of the time, things have become more abstract. Okay? Until you get these representations, these symbols, that are completely divorced, completely different. Many stages of the actual sounds of the language changing as well later, until this language, both spoken and written, is entirely distinct from the languages that they came from, to the point where they're unintelligible. You can't decode them directly. Okay? You cannot say that that picture, okay, is that sound, because it absolutely is not. The essence of the word male, both in its written and spoken form, is distinct from the essence of an actual male, as in the gender. Okay? You know, they usually have dicks, but eunuchs will show you that they don't have to have dicks to be male. The essence of maleness is distinct from the phenomenological appendage, penis, and distinct from the written word male. The essence of maleness is completely distinct from all of those things. The sound male, the written word male, the phenomenological appendage associated with male, namely penis, is distinct from that. Completely, it's even distinct from the Y chromosome. Okay, so if you, at that point, still think a dyslexic person is insane because they're not able to see or automatically accept the relationship, the false association between the sound and the image, you're full of it. Okay? It's plain as the nose in your face that those associations are not, quote unquote, the truth. Don't mistake real exist with the truth at this point. Okay? The systems of symbolism, cults, religions, and so on and so forth are just that. Imaginal constructs that at some point someone attempted to show to represent an experience that they had to try and articulate it to someone else, to communicate. Often with imaginal constructs or spirituality or religion, it is one imaginal construct talking about another. So the atheists of the world turn around and say, none of it's phenomenological, it's all imaginal. Okay? So it might exist, as Kant said, in the noumenal or the imaginal, but it doesn't exist in the phenomenological, therefore it cannot be scientifically tested, therefore we're not interested. If the atheist is interested in science at that point. They might not be, in which case I might not go that far. Okay? So, when you project your aphorisms, your symbolisms, your imaginal constructs into situations that are not your own, and you ignore the actual symbolism, imaginal constructs that person actually used, you are engaging in toxic abuse. You're engaging in mental abuse. And here's how you were doing it. Take, for example, how the Scientologists took the cross. We're gonna give some love to Christians today. Usually they get crap. Okay? The Scientologists took the cross and they try to make out that they were doing Scientology, but their symbolism was a cross. Okay? It's a religion of science, so they have a cross. Okay? They're not making any sense. Okay? Unless you understood the logical background or the framework that they're working with, okay, within the framework of their worldview, it might make sense. That's why people stay in that cult, because they've accepted some of the assumptions of that worldview, and therefore they've joined that cult. However, if you look at the what you call the misappropriation of the cross, okay, it's called cultural misappropriation, which means the symbols of one culture have been stolen by another and used in a completely different context in a way that is abusive to the previous culture, has a drastically different meaning. Or as the Christians sometimes say, the devil mimics the rituals of Christ. Okay, so what would a Christian turn around and say? Scientology is working for the devil, therefore it mimics because it mimics the rituals of Christ by having the cross. Okay, that's not to say Christ exists. That's not to say that Christians are telling the truth. It's not to say that Scientologists are telling the truth. It's to say that within the framework of the Christian language, that is how they might describe cultural misappropriation that the Scientologists have done in that particular case. In both cases, they're talking about an imaginal construct called the cross, or the devil, or the Christ, or whatever the Scientologists are actually referring to when they use that symbol, because actually they're referring to something different in a manner which maybe they could have chosen a different brand, okay? They are, in fact, mocking Christianity when they do that. L. Ron Hubbard was quoted as saying that Jesus was a pedophile. So, at that point, you can ask a question. Actually, let's ask this genuine question. Why did L. Ron Hubbard even attribute any adjectives to the character Jesus H. Christ, yet there is no scientific reason to believe that Jesus ever existed? Because there's not. Scientific means phenomenology. Phenomenology means, okay, what physical world evidence do you have to support the existence of Jesus Christ? Vatican, where's the census records? Vatican, you came from the Roman Empire. We've got a lot of documentation to prove that. Okay, Vatican, your story was that Jesus H. Christ was born when his parents were doing his census at Bethlehem. Vatican, where's the census record? Vatican, you've never given it. Vatican, do you have if someone goes through your great library and finds the records there, will they find a record of that, or was there some reason to believe that there was some kind of record destruction going on in Galilee back in about somewhere between 33 BC and 33 AD, just to give it a rough guesstimate. Okay, you've got records about King Herod. You've got records about Pliny the Elder. You've got records about Plotinus. You've got records about all kinds of emperors and kings and generals and all kinds of things. I mean, the Roman Empire is extremely well documented, like really well documented, to the point where there are people who might know more about the Roman Empire than the country they're living in right now. Okay? But for some reason, you haven't shown the census records of Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem. You've also never shown any records to prove that Pontius Pilate existed either. Okay, where's the records to prove that Pontius Pilate existed? Oh, you mean the Gospels? But you've shown that those Gospels were written about 200 AD. So at least 150 years after the death of the character in question. Okay, so they've shown no phenomenological evidence that Jesus H. Christ ever existed. Those are the phenomenological facts. The noumenal or imaginal construct arguments is that L. Ron Hubbard says that Jesus Christ was a pedo. Well, what did he believe? Look, if he was a scientist, he would not believe that he existed. There's no evidence to support his existence. So you can't argue that. Until they pony up the evidence, you cannot argue that scientifically, because there's no phenomena to prove that. Okay? They haven't provided the phenomena to prove that. There's no empirical argument for it. It is all imaginal constructs. So when L. Ron Hubbard projected that imaginal construct as a slander and a slur, that was a symbolic mockery of the Christians. Okay? That's disrespect on them. Scientology is engaged in cultural misappropriation of a Christian symbol and mocked Christians by insulting the imaginal construct, Jesus. Okay? So Scientology, in that respect, okay, is disrespectful, rude, obnoxious, and obscene. And not in the slightest bit scientific either. Because if L. Ron Hubbard was a scientist, he'd argue, well, Jesus never existed in the first place. He wouldn't ascribe any adjectives to his person, let alone slanderous ones. He'd just say, well, he never existed. That's the genuine scientific argument. Okay? And the genuine scientific argument as well is, here the Vatican has census records in their library, they should pony it up. We don't actually have the answer until they do. But because they haven't done that, they've been holding people hostage with an imaginal construct. Oh, he might have been real. That's your imaginal construct. You're holding people hostage with an imaginal construct. And they hold people hostage with other imaginal constructs like God and the devil and stuff like that, or in the case of the Scientologist, Xenu. Okay? So what those cultists have in common is they hold people's minds hostages with imaginal constructs. They invent boogeymans that people's minds struggle to pass whether or not it's plausible. And the imaginal constructs get to them. So the fundamental psychosis of the apes gets manipulated by the other apes. And that fundamental psychosis is that people have been linguistically confused by jargon and common parlance not being the same thing, by different cults and groups misusing terms, both ones that are common parlance and ones that are technical, to fuck with people's imaginal constructs, and that messes with the egregores, as the esotericists calls it, because egregores live in the world of the imaginal, the noumena, which is to say they exist and are real but not phenomenological. If you're going to see things from Kantian philosophy, potentially. Now, just because that's philosophy, philosophy, it doesn't mean that's actual truth. Okay? We haven't established whether or not it's actual truth yet in terms of argument. Whether or not that's true is independent of the argument. Okay? However, they are imaginal constructs. So all these aphorisms are imaginal constructs. When you take someone's symbolism, their imaginal constructs, and you misappropriate it for your own purposes, you are abusing their collective of minds. And this is something that we need to stand up for Aboriginal Australia for. We 100% need to stand behind and up for mob in Australia who've been arguing that the Empire deliberately put their institutional shit on top of, more commonly, places that were important to them and misappropriated what they were used for. Canberra is a good example of this. Okay? Even though phenomenologically you have no concern, as far as imaginal constructs are concerned, there's a shit ton of reason to be concerned about this. The Spirit of Destiny argument about how Walter Burley Griffin, a mason that was hired in the 1960s to redesign Canberra so the new Parliament House could be built, which includes dredging and redirecting the Molonglo River, which included plotting the roads. It included putting new Parliament House on the site where the boggon moths spawn, which interrupted their life cycles, reduced their size from the palm of this hand to the size of this thumb, interrupted an ancient festival which occurs usually around February every year, a festival with ancient roots that goes back 50,000 years, made the shape of the roads so the handle of a spear or a scabbard was the Parliament, with the pointy bit pointing at Mount Ainslie, with, on that spear point, just behind the Molonglo River and at the foot of Mount Ainslie, the War Memorial. So all the dead soldiers are with Mount Ainslie, and there's a great big fucking knife pointing at Mount Ainslie, and there's the Parliament is the handle to hold that weapon. Mount Ainslie is a woman's mountain. It's a woman's mountain. Under tradition, that's a woman's mountain. The actual spot where the parliaments are is, the word Canberra does mean meeting place. The tent embassy has a sacred fire right there on that crossroads of that handle to block the toxicity being directed at the women. The Aboriginal tent embassy is standing up against misogyny. By doing that, their sacred fire has been protecting the women of at least 5 tribes because of the Ngunnawal, Narragain, Boggon Moth Festival meeting place that place symbolically seems to be. Not claiming any group has particular jurisdiction. That's for mob to decide, not this voice, not this body. Symbolically though, that sacred fire to tent embassy is blocking the toxicity coming from Parliament House and Old Parliament House and Walter Burley Griffin's Masonic design and fucking the Australian War Memorial and the misdirection of the Molonglo River and the fucking fights coming from the Press Club, the fucking Rose Gardens, and you fucking name it. That sacred fire is protecting the women of Australia, mate. It's protecting the Boggon Moth streaming, which goes all the way to Mascot in Sydney, which goes all the way out to Wiradjuri country, which goes out to the coast with the Yuin and Darugga speaking peoples. And even the Boggon Moth flies all the way down from Queensland, specifically from the Clarence Valley and the Clarence River. That sacred fire is protecting the entirety of the east coast of New South Wales from misogynistic toxicity and warmongering. It is one of the most fabulous symbols in the fucking continent. It is one of the most, and because it's a spirit of destiny, which is associated symbolically in conspiracy theories with all the actual symbolism of associated with masonry, real or false, with imperial control and domination, they have in fact blocked imperial control and domination of Australian women by putting that fire there. It is sacred. It is a sacred fire. It is a holy fire. And every firekeeper that has kept that fire has been an angel of mercy for Australian women, both black and white and brindle. They are doing the job of the angels, to use the white fella's language. Take away all the symbolism of the God and the devil and just assume, also the word angel being associated with English speaker. No, we'll take the word angel out. No, because it's associated with Engels or English speaker. No. Okay, it's a false association. Okay, no. The warriors of light who do good and justice. Okay, the firekeepers of the Aboriginal Chitan Embassy are are people who do the good thing. Okay. See how easy it was for Christianized language that is racist to come out to try and describe something that's actually blocking the evils of those cults and their ideological permutation through the imaginary constructs of masonry. Okay? The point is, they're doing a favourable thing, okay? They're not doing a good thing because they're not doing a God thing, okay? Because God implies the imaginal construct, okay, of Christianity, okay, and a particular cult or symbolic system that might be independent of that. So see how these are all projections onto something. When you use this language, it becomes projections onto what they're actually doing. Either way, they're blocking something that we don't like. Okay? The simplest answer is that Sacred Fire at the Chitan Embassy is blocking something that we don't like. Imperial domination of women. Thank you, Sacred Fire. Okay? And that Sacred Fire has been allowed to stand and will stand into the future, has been doing since 1974. Isn't it wonderful? Okay. Let's look at the symbolism of what Tony Abbott did. Tony Abbott stood on New Parliament House lawns out the front of Parliament House with the Sydney Young Liberals and some others at a protest against the Gillard government's CSG policy. At this point, we have no opinion on that policy. It's not what's relevant to this story. What's relevant to this story is the ditch the witch sign and the burn the witch sign. Okay? They had actual placards, in other words, imaginal constructs or symbols, phenomenologically represented. See how language gets confusing? Of witches burning and called her Julia, and even had the word Julia on fire. Like they wanted to set her on fire. Like they wanted to burn the witch. In truth, Julia Gillard is an atheist who does not practice witchcraft or believe in it. Okay? So that's slander. That's projecting their worldview onto her. Their worldview coming from, well, witch burning is a symbolic layover from Europe, isn't it? Wasn't it the case that a lot of the witches that got burnt were women over 35 who weren't married and didn't become mothers? Like, weren't they actually targeting the spinsters, the barren women, for not fitting the gender role? They must have been a witch. That is an actual story that comes out of people who critique European history. It's not necessarily a feminist argument, however, that is a critique that's come out. That some of the witch burnings were directly targeting women who weren't married, who didn't die of plague, and weren't mothers, as signs of being witches. Are you fucking kidding? Are you fucking kidding? They also reckon they burnt 45,000 redheads at the stake. Are you fucking kidding? Because they thought red hair was a sign of being a witch. Okay? These imaginal constructs are... That's racism against redheads, isn't it? That's sexism against and misogyny against women who didn't get married and weren't mothers. That's racism against redheads. And when they did that, symbolically, they were invoking 400 years of murder against against people who actually fit a description. Women over 35 who are not married, don't have children, have red hair. Okay? That, in terms of its imaginal construct history, in terms of its weight, has enormous symbolic reference. That is a massive piece of symbolism right there. Imperial symbolism. Okay? Not just Catholic, but also Protestant when it comes to European history. And the place that it was done, just outside the handle of the scabbard, facing Mount Ainslie at the time, with the Parliament in the background. How can you not see that as a misogynistic and racist act symbolically? Because that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what that was. Okay? When Julia Gillard gave that famous misogyny speech in Parliament House, she might have thought at the time that she was a bit upset because maybe she'd been personally slighted, and on the subject of Peter Slipper, that was, a bit much for Tony Abbott to call her the sexist. Whether or not your debate about the Peter Slipper issue is relevant or not, it is relevant as far as the member for Fisher idea is concerned, but we won't go into that. Okay? If you see that symbolically, in terms of the imaginal constructs, the egregor that's going on there, she stood up to 400 years of murder. In that speech, she stood up for 400 years of redheads in Europe being murdered. She stood up to 400 years of women over the age of 35 being murdered simply for not being mothers. She stood up to 400 years of attempted genocide of redheads, 400 years of attempted genocide of unmarried women or women who weren't mothers. Symbolically, in imaginal constructs, that's what she did right in there when she gave them such speech. 400 years of murder was stood up to when that woman, Julia Gillard, said that to Tony Abbott. 400 years of it. Okay, so in the phenomenological, it was way more simple than that. In the imaginal constructs, it was a massive thing to do. It was an extraordinary speech of epic proportions that stood up for hundreds of thousands of murdered people. And moreover, because of where that man and his cohorts did that bit distinguished symbolism, and how they faced it at Mount Ainslie, that's when she stood up to them. She stood up for every woman on the east coast of Australia, including Aboriginal women. In imaginal constructs, egregor, she stood up for every woman on the east coast of Australia. She stood up for the Bogor Moth Festival. She stood up for the female elders past, present and future of Mount Ainslie. She stood up for the redheads who got murdered. She stood up for the women who never got married and never had children. She stood up in terms of the constructs and egregors for every woman who got murdered for having their femaleness and lack of parenthood as a sign of them being in leagues with the devil. She stood up for every redhead that got murdered. She stood up for all of those people just by doing that in that moment. She stood up against the Masonic symbol. She stood in favour for what the 10 Embassies flag really stands for, as an imaginal construct, which is respect for country. And in tradition, there is such a thing as men versus women's country. Black Mountain is for the men, and Mount Ainslie is for the women, they say. She stood up for the right to women to have their own country. She stood up for the right for the Bogon Moss to be Bogon Moss and not be crushed by the empire. It was the most anti-imperial, anti-hate speech, symbolically, that you could possibly imagine because of the way that Australia functions in history. The way the east coast of Australia functions in history. The way those stories function in history. Consider that a fan reply and a thank you.